It is early in the morning, but the kitchen already feels heavy with worry. A mother opens the cupboard and finds a handful of cornmeal, a little salt, and an almost empty jar of cooking fat. There is no meat. There is no flour. Her husband has not found steady work in weeks, and the few coins resting inside a kitchen cup must last until Saturday. One of the children asks what they are having for breakfast. The mother does not answer immediately. She checks the flour sack one more time, even though she already knows it is empty. Then she picks up a small basket and walks toward the garden behind the house. The rows are not perfect. Some leaves have insect holes, and several plants are beginning to turn brown. But beneath the tired-looking garden, food is still waiting. That family may have had almost no money, but they were not completely without food. During the Great Depression, small food gardens helped many struggling families put vegetables on the table and save part of the harvest for winter. Even a modest piece of land could reduce the amount of food a household needed to buy. For many families, the garden worked like an extra pantry. It provided food after the money was gone, and sometimes it became the thin green line between hardship and hunger. One plant on this list practically replanted itself. Another gave families something sweet when store-bought sugar was too expensive. Number 8 was so stubborn that many modern gardeners now consider it a problem. And the plant at number 1 was so dependable that having it in storage could change how a family faced winter. Now, let us count down 25 forgotten garden plants that fed families when money ran out. Number 25, ground cherries. Ground cherries were never the heaviest crop in the garden, but they provided something that became rare during hard times: sweetness. The golden fruits grew inside paper-like husks and dropped when ripe. Children could gather them beneath the leaves. Families ate them fresh, cooked them into sauce, or preserved them when sugar was available. They could not replace beans, potatoes, or corn, but they brought variety to a poor household. Survival was also about giving children one happy moment when the world felt uncertain. Ground cherries were not candy from a store, but to a child with very little, they may have tasted even better. Number 24, Salsify. Salsify was once familiar in kitchen gardens, but many people today would not recognize it. Above the soil, it looked ordinary. Beneath the ground was a long, pale root that could be boiled, mashed, fried, or added to soup. Some people called it the oyster plant because its cooked flavor was thought to resemble oysters. Its true value was simpler, another filling root for winter. When potatoes, turnips, and cabbage appeared every day, a different taste mattered. Salsify made soups and stews less repetitive. It was awkward to dig, but hard times taught families not to judge food by fashion. A crop did not need to be beautiful. It only needed to come out of the ground when the cupboard was empty. Number 23, Swiss chard. Swiss chard offered struggling families something precious: repeated harvests. Instead of pulling up the entire plant, gardeners removed the larger outside leaves and allowed the younger center leaves to keep growing. One planting could return to the kitchen again and again. Both leaves and stalks were edible. They could enter soup or be cooked with onion, beans, or drippings. Chard could not feed a family alone. Its strength was the long harvest. Families valued plants that kept working. One row did not provide one meal. It provided a series of meals, arriving leaf by leaf. Number 22, mustard greens. Mustard greens could bring life to a meal when the kitchen had almost nothing else. Their sharp, peppery flavor improved plain food built around cornbread, beans, potatoes, or a small piece of salt meat. During lean times, strong flavor had real value. Families harvested young leaves or cooked larger ones with milder greens, producing a full pot that tasted richer than its cost. Mustard also grew in cooler weather, extending the fresh food season. It did not pretend to be meat. When the same inexpensive ingredients appeared every day, mustard greens made them feel different. Sometimes abundance was not a larger plate. Sometimes it was enough flavor to make a poor meal feel complete. Number 21, walking onions. Walking onions almost seemed to move through the garden by themselves. The plant formed clusters of small bulbs at the top of its stalks. When those clusters became heavy, the stalks bent down and the bulbs could take root where they touched the soil. The tops worked like scallions. while the bulbs flavored beans, potatoes, and broth. Most importantly, families did not always need to buy new seed. A neighbor could share several bulbs, creating another patch. Walking onions could not fill a stomach, but they made cheap food taste better. A little onion could change the smell of an entire kitchen, and during hard times, the plant helped provide its own next beginning. Before we continue, we need to understand something about old family gardens. People did not always choose plants because they were fashionable, unusually large, or pretty enough for a photograph. A family with little money asked much harder questions. How many meals will this row produce? Can we eat more than one part of the plant? Will it grow again after we cut it? Can we save the seed? Will it survive if the rain comes late? Can we keep it after winter begins? A beautiful plant was welcome. A plant that could become 6 dinners was valuable. During the 1930s, families were repeatedly encouraged to treat the garden as part of the household food budget. Crops such as Salsify, Chard, mustard, Rutabagas, Parsnips, Okra, and Turnips were not unusual curiosities. They were practical foods that could reduce the number of things a family needed to buy. The next plants did something especially useful. They survived heat, neglect, difficult soil, or the simple lack of money required to pamper them. Number 20, Purslane. Today, Purslane is usually pulled out as a weed. It grows low against the ground with fleshy leaves and reddish stems. It can appear in disturbed soil where more delicate vegetables struggle. For families who recognized it, that stubbornness was useful. Young leaves and tender stems have long been eaten in different food traditions, either fresh or cooked. Correct identification is essential because similar plants may be unsafe. The lesson is not that every weed is food. Earlier generations simply knew the plants around them in greater detail. What looks like a nuisance today once looked like free food. Purslane asked for almost nothing, which made it valuable when the household had almost nothing to give. Number 19, lamb's quarters. Lamb's quarters was another plant that rarely waited for an invitation. It appeared in field edges, barnyards, and freshly disturbed garden soil. Young leaves could be cooked like greens, offering food before or between the main harvests. It did not require a carefully measured row or a new packet of seed. Sometimes it appeared simply because the ground had been opened. Correct identification was essential. Families who used it relied on knowledge passed through parents, neighbors, and experience. The plant still grows, but much of that knowledge has disappeared. Lamb's quarters asked almost nothing from the family, yet it could still add leaves to an empty cooking pot. Number 18, okra. When southern summers became too hot for many vegetables, okra often kept producing. The tall plants formed pods that needed regular picking. Young pods could be fried, stewed with tomatoes, added to soup, or sliced into other dishes. Okra also thickened liquid. That mattered when a small amount of meat or vegetables needed to flavor a larger pot of food. Families dried sliced okra and saved seed from mature pods. It still required work, but it produced during the hottest weeks when cooler crops had slowed. A productive row could keep sending food toward the kitchen for weeks. While the sun punished other plants, okra continued lifting new pods into the air. Number 17, cowpeas. Cowpeas included black-eyed peas, crowder peas, field peas, and many regional varieties. Fresh peas were cooked during summer, while mature seeds were dried for later. In some traditions, young leaves were also eaten. One planting could serve the household now and again in winter. Dried cowpeas required no refrigerator. They could become soups, stews, or simple pots served with greens and cornbread. They also tolerated hot southern summers better than many ordinary peas. A row of cowpeas could feed a family while the pods were fresh and leave dry food behind after the vines died. That is the kind of crop hard times made difficult to forget. Number 16, amaranth. Amaranth could perform 2 jobs in the same garden. Young leaves from edible varieties could be cooked like greens. If allowed to mature, the plant produced many small seeds that could be used more like a grain. That combination made it valuable. It handled summer heat when lettuce became bitter and spinach disappeared. Correct variety selection mattered. Not every wild pigweed was food. But struggling families valued crops with more than one use. A plant that offered leaves, seed, and future planting material earned its place more easily than one that provided only decoration. Amaranth did not simply stand in the garden looking impressive. It worked for the space it occupied. Modern gardeners often seek perfect vegetables. Hard times families could not. Split cabbage entered soup, crooked roots were mashed, and damaged leaves were trimmed and cooked. Their gardens were not designed for photographs. They were designed to survive bad weeks. Gardens still failed. Drought came. Insects destroyed crops. And some families remained hungry. The past should never be romanticized. But hardship taught people to notice value that modern abundance makes easy to ignore. The next plants help families carry food beyond summer and into winter. Number 15, sweet sorghum. When white sugar was too expensive, sweet sorghum offered another source of sweetness. The tall stalks could be cut and crushed to release juice. That juice was boiled into dark syrup used on biscuits, cornbread, pancakes, and simple desserts. It was hot, sticky work. Steam rose from the boiling pan as the pale juice slowly turned dark and thick. Children often waited nearby, hoping to taste the first spoonful. That labor produced something the family otherwise had to buy. Some sorghum also provided grain or animal feed. Children who rarely received candy often remembered sorghum syrup as a treat. When money ran out, sweetness did not completely disappear. It simply had to be planted, cut, crushed, boiled, and earned. Number 14, beets. Beets offered two different foods from one patch. The roots could be boiled, roasted, pickled, or chopped into soup. The young tops could be cooked like greens before the roots reached full size. That allowed families to eat from the crop early and return for the heavier roots later. Their deep color also made a cheap plate appear less empty. They were not always loved, but food that filled the bowl and could be preserved earned respect. Even the tops had value. One seed provided leaves first and a root later. In a household counting every penny, half a plant could not be treated as waste. Number 13, parsnips. Parsnips hid their greatest value underground. The pale roots could remain in cool soil after many vegetables stopped producing. Cold conditions often made them taste sweeter. Families boiled them, roasted them, mashed them with potatoes, or added them to soup. Parsnips germinated slowly and occupied the garden for months. Earlier, families were willing to think farther ahead. A plant did not need to solve today's hunger if it was preparing to solve hunger later. The parsnip was food held beneath the soil. It needed no package and took up no shelf space. When frost ended the season for tender plants, this root could still be waiting. The cold that destroyed one crop could improve another. Number 12, rutabagas. Rutabagas were never glamorous. They grew into large roots that could be boiled, mashed, roasted, or added to soup. Their mild flavor blended easily with potatoes, onions, cabbage, and small scraps of meat. A household might have only a bone, a little pork, or some drippings. Rutabagas turned that flavor into a larger pot and stored well through winter. Nobody planted rutabagas to impress visitors. They planted them because a little meat might flavor the supper, but rutabagas were what filled the bowls. Hard times gave plain food an honest kind of importance. Number 11, turnips. Turnips were fast, practical, and useful from top to bottom. The leafy greens could be cooked while the roots continued growing beneath the soil. Later, those roots could be boiled, mashed, roasted, or added to stew. That gave a family two foods from one planting. Turnips also grew in cool weather, filling the gap between summer harvest and winter. Cooks balanced their strong flavor with potatoes, onions, greens, or pork seasoning. Turnips were not fancy. They were quick and dependable. When money was scarce, one seed that provided greens first and a root later was performing two jobs for the price of one. In July, a full garden could make a poor family feel rich. The real test arrived after frost blackened the vines. The food did not have to disappear. The garden moved indoors. Beans entered sacks and jars. Onions hung in airy rooms. Roots went into cellars, boxes, or protected pits. Squash rested on shelves and beneath beds. Storage carried summer labor into January. A cellar filled in October was more than a collection of vegetables. It was proof that winter had not won yet. The next crops could wait, store, or become many different meals. Number 10. Onions. An onion could not feed a family by itself, but it could rescue almost everything else. Beans without onion tasted plain. Potatoes cooked with onion felt more complete. A tiny piece of meat frying beside sliced onion made the kitchen smell like a much larger supper. Comfort also came from smell, flavor, and the feeling that a real meal was being prepared. Young tops were used early, while dried, mature bulbs lasted beyond the garden season. Families shared bulbs with neighbors and wasted very little. An onion did not fill the pot, but it could make an almost empty pot smell like supper. Sometimes that smell made a poor meal feel more generous than it really was. Number 9. Cabbage. Few plants could become as many different meals as cabbage. Fresh leaves became slaw. Chopped cabbage entered soup. Whole leaves wrapped other foods. Fried cabbage absorbed the flavor of onions, bacon grease, or salt pork. Fermentation could extend part of the harvest. A single firm head looked simple, but it held many future meals. Cabbage stretched potatoes, filled soup, and added weight beside beans or cornbread. Rough outer leaves could still be trimmed and cooked. When several heads matured, a household gained food that could be eaten fresh, cooked slowly, or preserved. It was not one meal waiting in the garden. It was many meals folded tightly inside green leaves. Number 8. Jerusalem artichokes. Jerusalem artichokes are not artichokes, and they do not come from Jerusalem. They are tall relatives of sunflowers that form knobby, edible tubers underground. They are also famously stubborn. A missed piece of tuber can grow into another plant, allowing the patch to spread beyond the place where it was planted. That behavior annoys many modern gardeners. To a family worried about food, stubbornness could look like a gift. The tubers could be dug when needed, and some could remain in the soil until the household was ready to use them. They could cause digestive discomfort, especially in large amounts. Still, a crop that insisted on returning felt like a promise. Number 7. Collard greens. Collard greens became a symbol of endurance because the plant itself could endure. Its thick leaves handled cool weather, and gardeners could harvest the lower leaves while allowing the center to keep growing. That provided a long season of food instead of one final harvest. Southern cooks prepared collards slowly with onion, salt, or pork seasoning. Cornbread could be dipped into the flavorful cooking liquid. Collards did not offer the heavy calories of corn or potatoes. Their value was different. They produced repeatedly, filled the pot, and remained useful late in the season. The leaves fed the family, and even the liquid helped complete the meal. Number 6. Sunflowers. Sunflowers are now often treated as decoration or bird food. Earlier food systems understood that they could feed people too. The seeds could be eaten, ground, mixed into food, or pressed for oil. Selected seeds also became the next planting. A large head held many future bites, depending on the variety and growing conditions. Birds could steal the seed, and pressing oil required labor. But sunflowers offered more than beauty. They provided human food, animal feed, and next year's seed. A sunflower was not simply a yellow face near the fence. It was food held in plain sight. Not every inheritance came as land or cash. Sometimes it arrived inside an old envelope. A grandmother wrote the name of a bean on the paper. A neighbor shared onion bulbs. A farmer saved corn from the strongest ears. A family kept seed from the squash that lasted longest. Those seeds moved into another garden and another generation. Saving seed reduced the need to buy again and preserved crops already proven in local soil. A saved seed was more than next year's plant. It was proof that the family expected to still be there next spring. The final 5 plants provided filling food, stored well, or became several different meals. Number 5. Dry beans. A jar of dry beans looked small on a shelf. Inside that jar were many future bowls. Beans could be eaten young or dried for storage without refrigeration. When needed, they expanded in water and became soup, stew, baked beans, or a filling meal with cornbread. Families could also save part of the harvest as seed. That meant food on the shelf, and next year's crop came from the same plants. Beans required shelling, sorting, soaking, and thorough cooking, but they offered valuable protein long after harvest. A jar did not look like wealth. Hard times taught families to see the meals hiding inside it. Number 4, sweet potatoes. In much of the South, sweet potatoes were not only a holiday side dish, they were security underground. A productive patch provided roots that could be baked, boiled, mashed, fried, added to bread, or used in simple desserts. Their natural sweetness made ordinary food feel special when store-bought sugar was scarce. Properly cured roots remained useful for months, turning summer labor into filling winter meals. They also provided comfort. When candy disappeared and dessert became rare, a hot roasted sweet potato could still make a child believe something special had been saved. It was food and sweetness coming from the same patch of earth. Number 3, winter squash. Winter squash arrived from the garden inside its own storage container. Its hard rind protected the flesh without a can, jar, or refrigerator. Mature squash, harvested carefully and kept dry, could last for months. The flesh became soup, bread, mash, or a meal with corn and beans. Seeds were roasted or saved. The vines needed space, but a successful plant produced several heavy fruits. Squash, resting safely on a shelf, made the future look less empty. Every hard shell represented soup, bread, mash, or supper that had not yet been needed. The plant had already created its own package. Number 2, dent corn. Dent corn was not the sweet corn eaten fresh in summer. It was allowed to mature and dry until the hard kernels could be stored and ground. Those kernels became cornmeal. Cornmeal became cornbread, mush, hoe cakes, dumplings, and other regional foods. Corn also fed chickens, pigs, and livestock. Selected ears provided seed for the following season. One harvest could feed people, feed animals, and help begin another crop. Corn demanded land, labor, and careful storage. But a successful harvest created an entire food system. Corn did not offer only one supper. It provided the foundation around which many meals could be built. And finally, at number 1, potatoes. The potato is not forgotten. What has been forgotten is what a pile of potatoes once meant. To a modern shopper, potatoes are an inexpensive supermarket bag. To a struggling family, potatoes behind the house could represent weeks of meals waiting underground. They could be boiled, baked, mashed, fried, shredded, added to soup, mixed with cabbage, or used to stretch a little meat. Small potatoes were not useless. Crooked potatoes were not rejected. A potato did not need to look perfect to stop a stomach from hurting. The crop produced filling food from modest space, though it still depended on weather and careful storage. Potatoes needed cool darkness, and families inspected the harvest for green or spoiled roots. The potato was not magical. Blight, rot, or insects could destroy it. But when the crop succeeded, a family did not need to know whether every supper would be exciting. They could at least believe there would be supper. That is why potatoes take the number 1 position. They were filling, flexible, familiar, and dependable. A family might not know what tomorrow's meal would taste like. But with potatoes safely stored, tomorrow's meal could still exist. Not every plant on this list disappeared from American gardens. Potatoes, beans, onions, cabbage, and corn are still familiar. What many people have forgotten is the role these plants once played when a family had very little money. They were not grown to preserve history. They were grown because supper had to come from somewhere. Some crops filled the stomach. Others added flavor, survived winter, or produced seed for another year. None of them could remove the hardship of poverty, and even the best garden could fail. Drought came. Insects destroyed plants. Families sometimes worked exhausting hours and still went hungry. The past was never a charming adventure, but the knowledge inside those gardens deserves respect. A seed represented a future meal. A stored squash bought the family time, and a jar of beans was a plan for a day when the cupboard might otherwise be empty. Which of these plants did your parents or grandparents grow? Maybe you remember helping someone shell beans, dig potatoes, gather greens, or carry squash into the house. Share that memory in the comments. When money ran out, many families had no savings in the bank, but some of them still had something growing behind the house.